this class. So what we're going to be talking about is from lesson 3 out of chapter 9, and it's called Two-Way Tables. So it's a way to organize information looking at two different things and trying to pull out statistics from it. So we're the last day of May. So we're going to start with an example, and the example is we've got student athletes. So we have a survey of 440 students is shown. And this is the results. Of the 440 students, they asked them whether or not they were on the honor roll or whether or not they played a sport. So they were asked 2 questions, and they either answered yes to both of them, no to both of them, or one got a yes and one got a no. Those were the only options. So the results of that survey came out this way. Only on the honor roll. And of the 440, it was 115. Only play a sport. And of the 440, only 45 played a sport. Play a sport. And on honor roll. There were 250. Okay? So, in the past, you may have done something like this. What's this called? Venn diagram. So we take our 2 categories, sports, playing sports, or on the honor roll. But what's interesting compared to the one we do in English is math ones need to be enclosed in a box. So what we're going to do is place our 115, 45, and 250 into our chart. So where does the 115 go? Say again?
Honor roll.
Okay, but honor roll has 2 pieces to it, right? It's got a big part of the circle, well, it's more of an oval, sorry, and then it has a portion of the oval that overlaps. So it's on the bigger one. So these are people who are purely doing honor roll, okay? And then where does the 45 go? Okay, so on the big part of sports. And where does the 250 go?
In the middle.
In the middle. So what should be true about the 115, 250, and 45?
It added up to 440.
Okay, so it should add up to 440, so let's see what we get. Because it needs to represent all the students who were surveyed. And we get 10, 9, 10, 11, and we get 4. Oh, 410, it's supposed to be 440 students. So what happened to the missing 30 students? Is that okay?
They're not on one place.
These were the sad ones who weren't on either one. So in a Venn diagram for math, they go in the box, but not inside of the circles. In English class, you don't have that box because everything fits into one of those 3 places. But in math, anything that doesn't fit in the one of the 3 places is outside. So 115 kids were on the honor roll but not in sports. 45 kids were in sports but were not on honor roll. We had 250 kids that were both in honor roll and sports, and we had 30 kids that were not on honor roll and not in sports. So what we want to do is to figure out what percent of the students were in that overlap section who did both honor roll and a sport. So if we wanted to figure out the percent of students on honor roll and, honor roll, and in sports, we would create a ratio, and that ratio would be the number of students that were in the sports, so that was the 250, or in both of them, excuse me, and we would divide it by the number of students that were asked to answer the questions in the survey, and that would be that 440. Now, using a calculator, I would get 250 divided by 440. Oh, huh. Oh, okay. So to find this one, I would get that would be about 0.568. So if I rounded that to the nearest hundredth, that would be about 0.57. But what would I do to change that to a percent? Jenny?
Move the decimal to the right 2 spaces.
So can somebody tell me mathematically what Jenny did that allowed her to move the decimal point right 2 places? Sean? Not scientific notation. Yeah, she multiplied by 100. So the answer to this question would be about 57% of these students that were surveyed are both on honor roll and do a sport. So over half of the kids. Now what if I change it and I say, okay, what about the percent of students on honor roll, I'm just going to abbreviate it, and in sports, let's see, compared to total on the honor roll. So what's the total of students who are on the honor roll? How would I figure out the total that's in honor roll? Chow Bao? Chow Bao.
You take 115 and divide it by 440.
Nope, that's not what my question was. My question is, how do I figure out how many students total were on the honor roll? Sam? Okay, and do what? And what do you see is in the honor roll part? Not just 115. The honor roll is this entire circle. So together, if I add those, that gives me 365 students that were on the honor roll. So what I can do is take that 250, and you need to take a test? Yeah, over here's fine. And I'm going to divide it by the 365. And again, I use my calculator. And this time I get something like 0.684, which would round to about 0.68. And if I multiplied that by 100, that gives me 68%. So when I looked at the percent of students that were both honor roll and in sports, and I compared it to just those who were on honor roll, it's a much larger looking number. When I compared the number of students on honor roll and sports compared to all the kids in the survey, it was a smaller amount of students. What we just calculated in the second group is called relative frequency. So relative frequency is the ratio, I'll use a different color here, of a subtotal. So in our case, it was the overlap group was the subtotal to a total. And the total we chose for the second one was just relative to the honor roll kids, okay? So that's part of what you're going to do is play around a little bit. Connor, we're taking notes, and you're not. So the title of our notes is two-way tables. So how is that applicable to this Venn diagram? Well, let me show you. So we're going to create that two-way table. So let's first give a definition to it. So what is a two-way table? So the two-way table, it shows data from one sample group So in the last one we did, one sample group was those on honor roll, the other sample group was those who were in sports. Shows data from one sample group as it relates to two different categories. Okay, I'll detract what I just said and say it differently. The sample group was the 440. The two different categories is the honor roll and sports categories. So to each question that's asked, there's a yes or a no answer. So in our table, we need to account for that. So we're going to take each of our categories, and one's going to go vertically, one's going to go horizontally. So we're going to say on honor roll, not on honor roll. And then we're going to have a total. Then up here, our categories are going to be play a sport, don't play a sport. Looks like playa, beach streaming. And then the last would be total. The group that ends up in the top left box is that 250 group. Okay. Let's see, what else did we have? We had 45 that were sports, but not honor roll. Let's see, what color was that? Green. So sports, not honor roll. So on play a sport, but not on honor roll, that was the 45. Let's see, what color did I use? Blue. So for the students that were on honor roll, but didn't play a sport, that was 115. And then we had 30, right? Those would be the kids who not on honor roll and didn't play a sport. So to get the total in the column play a sport, we would just add these two numbers and we would get 295. To get the total of don't play a sport, I would add these two numbers and I get 145. So I went down the directions, I went in columns. Now if I want to go the other way, and I want to go this direction, I'm going to add these two together to come up with the total who were on honor roll. So that would give me 365. And I would add this way to find the total who were not on honor roll. That would be 75. Now, if I add 365 and 75, if I add these together, I get 10, 4, 40, which, by the way, is the same as if I add those together. Okay? So what I've just done is now taken that Venn diagram and wrote it as a two-way table. Okay? I've got two categories that I need to look at two ways, yes and no's. Yes and no's. Okay? So what I can do with this information is to then come up with relative frequencies. Okay, so let's do a new one because we've done this one to death. So let's take a new one. Everybody good with this one? Okay, so we've got this guy, Felipe, and he asked students at his school, and he found that there were 78 students. So we had 78 students that he surveyed said they own a cell phone. Okay. And then he found 57 of those students own an MP3 player. So 57 students own a cell phone, because he said it was part of this group, and an MP3 player. Shh. And then there's 13 students that do not own a cell phone. So don't own a cell phone. But own the MP3 player. Okay. And then there was 9 students own neither. So what we're going to do is to create our table with our two categories, cell phones and MP3 players. And then we're going to fill in all the pieces that aren't in our chart. Then we're going to do some statistics, some interpretations of how frequently each of the people fall into these categories. So I'm having trouble with this. So I'm going to move this like this. Okay. So our two categories are own a cell phone, no cell phone. So we'll just say cell phone, no cell phone. And then we do want to know totals, so we'll put a total down here. And then we're going to create up here MP3 player. No MP3 player. Still too much talking. And we're going to have another total column over here. So I'm going to put in information. You tell me where to go. Where does 78 go? Does own a cell phone mean that they can't have an MP3 player? Or they can?
No, they can't.
Okay. It just says owns a cell phone.
So I mean, they don't have an extra.
So it'd be total for cell phone. There's your 78. Where would 57 go? So we have an intersection of cell phone and MP3 player, so that's going to be your 57. Go. Okay, where would 13 go? No cell phone, but own the MP3 player. So it'd be in that first column. So that would be your 13. And where would the 9 go? So where the intersection of no and no is. Because it says owns a cell phone, didn't make any qualifiers about having an MP3 player or not having an MP3 player. It just says owns a cell phone. So we know we have a total of 78 students that would have to own a cell phone. So our job now is to fill in the gaps. So take a moment and fill in the gaps. Okay, somebody give me one answer on how they got that one answer. So where does it go and how'd you get it? Okay, Desi. And okay, I agree with that. That sounds good. All right, somebody give me another answer. Sean.
At the no cell phone, MP3 player, there's no MP3 player.
Okay.
13 and 9, I just added them and I got 22.
Marvelous. Okay, keep going. Jenny?
57 plus 13, I got 70.
Fabulous. Okay, what else? Julia E?
21 plus 9 equals 30.
Okay, wonderful. We got one more. What's the granddaddy, Paul?
70 and 30.
Grand total is 100.
Now here's what's interesting. Whether I do it this way, 70 plus 30, come on you, or 78 plus 22, I get, oh, that's right, yep, I get 100. That's kind of convenient. That worked out nicely. Okay, now, what we're going to do is take this chart and we're going to do relative frequencies. Okay, relative frequency. So I want you to see how this works. So we're going to take all the same data and we're going to create a relative frequency table. So we have cell phone. We have no cell phone. Notice I'm not going to put a total in here. I'm going to use the data from above. We're going to have MP3 player. Yeah. No MP3 player. We're going to call this relative frequency. Now what's nice is our grand total number is 100, so that kind of makes math sometimes easier. Okay, so what I'm going to do is figure out, oh, I guess I do get one more. I get a total column just on the right side, just to make sure I've done my math right. So I'm going to change this, make this smaller. So we're going to add just a total column here. There should be 0 talking. So I'm going to start by putting my numbers back in. So we had 57 MP3 and cell phone people. We had 13 MP3 no cell phone people. We had 21 no MP3 but cell phone, and we had 9 that was a double no. So to find relative frequency, what I'm going to do is figure out the frequency of, let's put in these numbers. We had total number 78 people with cell phones, and we had 22 people with the no cell phones. So for the first calculation, in the upper left box, the cell phone, we want to compare how many people had cell phones and MP3 players compared to all the people with cell phones. So I'm using that right total to help me make this calculation. So I'm just going to tell you what that number is. If I use my calculator, it's about 0.73. Okay. When I do the 21, no MP3 player and cell phone. So I'm going to take that total and I'm going to compare it to all those people who had cell phones. So what percent is this group? And that would be about 27. Okay. Now, what's 0.73 plus 0.27? Yeah, it gives me 1. Okay, let's do the next group. So relative frequency of people that don't have a cell phone but have an MP3 player compared to those total with no cell phone. So that's going to be 13 over 22. So that works out to be about 0.59%. And then we're going to compare the people that had none, no phone, no MP3 player, and compare it to those who didn't have a phone. So we're going to divide it by the 22, and that's going to give me approximately 41. When I add them together, what do I get? Yeah, so 0.59 plus 0.41 gives me a total of 1. So what I was comparing was the people who had the numbers in the boxes, so MP3 player and cell phone, and I went across to the category which was had a cell phone. That matched to the 78. And then I did the same thing, MP3 player but no cell phone, but I compared it to the person that has no cell phone, so that was a total of 22. I can actually do this going down in columns too and figure out that relative frequency. So it's another set of calculations. So we can do all the different calculations. Okay? So if I wanted to go down, let's add that in there. So this one, we had total here would be 60, 70, and the total here was 30. Okay. So what I could do now going down is I could look at what the values would be for each one of these if I compared it to 70. So there's another whole set of calculations I can do. So I could figure out what the 57 divided by 70 was, and I could figure out the 13 divided by 70. So I have all these different calculations that I can do. Okay, and then here I could do 21 divided by 30. And I could do 9 divided by 30. So I have all these different ways that I can do my calculations, these relative frequencies. So what's interesting, and so you have to read kind of carefully when you're working on your homework tonight, what are they asking you to compare to? Sometimes they're just asking you to do a two-way table, and sometimes they're going to ask you to take the two-way table and to come up with a relative frequency by columns, or they'll say by rows. So you pay attention to the words, and it's going to tell you which direction to do things. So that's your homework for tonight.